take it away.
Thank you. Hello and welcome back, everyone. And it's great to see you. Wasn't that an amazing keynote this morning? And I want to crack on because there's lots of talks we have today. But I do want to just provide some feedback that we got from a researcher from Oxford University, and he's called David Shotton. And David, I hope you don't mind me saying this, but he says, thanks to Jennifer and the committee for organising the first truly international conference he has ever attended, both in terms of selection of speakers and in terms of those attending. It has expanded my horizons. Well, it's doing that to mine as well, and I hope it's doing that to everyone else's as well. It's really great to see the participation we've got from all over the world. And just a reminder, stick your questions in the Q&A, stick anything else you like in the chat. There's also the Slack channels for those who do have access to them. That's a big learning point for us next time we do this meeting. And so to panel 5, and this is called Researchers, Open Science and Open Access Behaviours, What Changed in 2020? So not a big question. And we have an incredible set of speakers from all over the world today. One of the things about this and about the question that we're posing in the title of this panel is how do we know? And I think a lot of this relies on both an understanding of what researchers are doing and how they're behaving, but also what the policy drivers are helping to change that behavior. And we're going to hear aspects of all of that. And I think in particular, the whole notion of research on research itself, while an established field, and especially within the humanities, has really been relatively a new and emerging discipline within the more sort of biosciences and life sciences. So first up, and I'm just going to go through everyone's bios very briefly, and then we'll go straight to the speakers, is Ramasami, who's was formerly Secretary to the Government of India and served the Ministry of Science and Technology during 2006 to 14. He served as a member of ABEO of the Organization of the Prohibition of Chemical Weapons during 2016 to 19. He's currently chair professor at the Anna University in Tamil Nadu. He's been a key member of several policy initiatives of the Indian science sector, and he served as a founder member of the Global Research Council initiated by the National Research Foundation of the US. His current research interests are in the area of science, technology, and innovation policies for low resource setting of the developing world. And I think with our conversations about equity and how we can start to change that, what he has to say is really important. Stephen Pinfield, who's based in the UK, and he's a professor of information services management at the University of Sheffield. He's also the associate director of the newly formed Research on Research Institute, which is a joint initiative between Wellcome, Sheffield, Leiden, and Digital Science. And he works at the interface between research and practice. He's also the co-author of a very recently published book called Open Access in Theory and Practice. So I'm plugging that for you there, Stephen. From China, good evening, we also have Yang Pan, who's the Director of Marketing and Public Relations at the Chinese Medical Association's publishing house. And she started as the editor of the Chinese edition of the BMJ in 2001. And she's been part of the publishing industry for 20 years. So she has a huge amount of experience. In particular, during the sort of COVID pandemic, she worked as she took part in building up the COVID-19 academic research communication platform, and she supported the Chinese Academy of Sciences and Technology to initiate Chinese science journals to join the COVID-19 database. And finally, we have Hélène Draux, who is an employee of Digital Science, and she joined them fairly recently in 2017, but she's also a researcher and her speciality and her research focuses on gender diversity in research. And it's going to be really interesting to see some of the information that she will present that Digital Science have done in a report recently about the impact of COVID and others. So without more ado, please put in your questions, everyone, and your chat. And Sami, I welcome you to OASPA 2020.
Thank you, Chair. Hello to everybody. Good day to all of you joining this meeting from different time zones of this world. In the last 2 days, I'm attending several sessions of this conference, and I remain educated. Many speakers are truly experts in the open access domain and eminent scholars. I started to wonder, why was I invited at all? Bernie and the organizers may have thought of betting on a dark horse like me, who did scholarly research in the Jurassic times and worked in policy space for more than 14 years now. But I have the benefit of a ringside view. As someone who is not part of a change, I can observe a change, especially behavioral changes of scientific communities, even better. And I'm going to share with you today oops, what happened? Dave, Madan,
Can you help? Or Chloe can help. So we just need to, you need to go down to the bottom to the green symbol. It says.
No, I have lost the screen itself.
Ah, you've lost the screen itself. Okay. Pop out if you need to, and go and find your right-hand
link itself. Link itself.
Oh dear. Itself. We can see you. Don't worry.
You can see me.
We can see you. Yeah, we can see and hear you. We just can't see your screen. Thank you.
Yes, thank you.
This is what makes live recording so exciting.
It does. It really does.
Great. You're there.
Okay. Okay. Well, sorry for these technical problems. And you see, Professor Yang talked of the dynamics of change. Let me share a perspective on a worldview of the dynamics of behavioral change in the research landscape. It is truly a perspective of a policy professional. It is going to have 4 parts in the structure of the talk. There will be driving factors of research in changing global dynamics, the parts and rules of research funding agencies influencing researchers' behavior. I used to be the head of the Indian research funding for several years. The global COVID pandemics and its impact on mindsets of scholarly scientists, and I guess what could be expected in 2020 and beyond in scholarly publications as some kind of a perspective and a kind of worldview. We want to go back and look at the 1820s. Research was truly a scholarly activity. It is activity of the rich. Scholarly publications were done to reveal the new findings to open and globally. In 1920s, the scholarly publications are focused on early bird to know first. So the R&D funding by the public systems emerged as a national activity. Research became truly a national socio-economic activity. The 2020 pandemics has shown that this global activity should also address the human welfare. As R&D for global needs at an affordable cost is becoming a reality. Therefore, when we're discussing this behavioral change in 2020s, I look at this as a time of change. If one were to look at this changing geography of research intensity in 21st century, in terms of the share of the total funding of the world, you would see that the share of the upper middle income group countries, of course led by China, has been increasing significantly, and the innovation thrust is truly becoming worldwide. Fundamentally, people recognize the science and technology activity is necessary for development of their own nations, and therefore even lower upper middle income group countries like India invest significantly into research. Now, if you look at the kind of investments that are taking place in this world today, there's a thrust for market competitiveness in global knowledge economy. That has been the driving factor, and fundamentally, the emerging and developing economies tend to quantitatively increase their expenditure in R&D in the 21st century. So the scholarly publications is one front, but then the R&D being connected to the economy is another issue that is coming up in this process. During the later part of the 20th century, the research had become primarily resource intensive. It had changed from what was primarily a passion-driven scholarship activity, has now become an activity with a calculated returns. So there's an expectation from the R&D investments. The nation states allocated finite resources for research and set up research councils for funding research with global and functional autonomies. The researchers, therefore, tended to readjust their priorities towards those of funding agencies. It caused a behavioral change. Number of scholarly publications became a yardstick for funding. In fact, my previous speaker talked about the role of STI indicators. Then this question of publish or perish became the slogan. Then it became patent, publish, prosper became the catchword. This is all going against this, what I call the open access to publication and new knowledge. It turns out that in 2011, at the initiative of the National Science Foundation, some of us joined together and set up a global research council. I was part of that governing body. We became one of the 8 members of this body. And as early as 2011, in this particular time scale, the Global Research Council felt the need for promoting open source, open access to science and publications. So during the 2012-14, the Global Research Council addressed the need for the role of open science and access to scholarly publications, and then talked about the role of funding agents in the world to cause behavioral changes among the scientists in this world. Of course, broadly speaking, Global Research Council has been supporting in increasing the open access to scholarly publications, and the funding agent is playing positive and a catalytic role in changing the behavior of researchers and adhering to this principle of open access. So this is a part of the activity that I myself was personally involved in. Now, when you look at the broad principles that the Global Research Council developed, we said encourage and support open access to journal publications, encourage and support of authors in self-depositing in open access repositories, and create the interconnection of these repositories. Then we went through a process, through a very collective process. Finally, when we were looking at this, there was something like 54 research funding bodies of the world participated in this process. And it was aiming at raising the open access, promote and support, and really set up implementable actions. So the action plan was really taken into account of the variations of the participants and different backgrounds and cultural setting in which the scholars function. Therefore, the funding agencies had to really play an important activity in taking up this possibility, and this was done. And the main funding and R&D funding agencies became a signatory to the JRC action plans. And if you look at India's approach, I think last time we counted, it's some 5 years ago, it was 270. Now it's about 560 or some journals have enrolled into open source path. There are as many as 8 registries. This is one side. We really brought a policy to drive the system rather than a regulation to drive the system in this area. So we resolved a general policy of National Data Sharing and Access Policy in 2012, which talked about data created at the public investment must be available to civil society. It's not just scholars alone. And that availability can be had, it can be open at free, that can be regulated and registered and so on. So this was a prelude to this open source drive. Now I am very happy to see the Department of Biotechnology Wellcome Trust Alliance now is part of the global open resource drive of the system. And we have had a couple of years ago, there's a Delhi declaration in the region as an expression of commitment to open source. And I believe, as far as India is concerned, we choose to stay in the learning time at this time because there are variations exist, and then bring about a promoting policy and create a voluntary practice framework among the scholars rather than to regulate them at this stage. But many funding bodies promote these as a strategy. And what I did was, is there a behavioral change? So I looked at the changing habit of researchers to publish their findings in open source journals. And I've deliberately limited my attention to only the journals published in English. And primarily this is taken from the web by ACI Journal Index. And what we have done here is to look at the observed trend in the culmination of several factors. And you can see from the 2000 region, the share of the open source publications in the journals is increasing significantly. That is a behavioral change that I like to point out to you. And this change is, of course, is caused by several factors, where funding agencies is one of them, but I think the scholars themselves see the purpose of this change. So the COVID-19 pandemic seems to have changed the social context of research and science in general. The societies and national governments will look for practical solutions for coping with this pandemic and economic fallouts due to social distancing from global science communities. People have come to realize the importance of scientific research for social and public good and the value of open global science in preference to research for private good and profit in a closed manner. And that's a directional change that we see today. So the global pandemic has showcased the need for scientific collaboration. The research in constrained global economy needs to have new models for collaborative excellence rather than competitive excellence setting up, wherein the one-upmanship was the marketplace was a primary factor. So for meeting the challenge faced by the humanity, the world, I believe, is needed to act as one, and the fighting global bad calls for collective work. I think the COVID-19 is likely to impact the global needs, really mindset in favor of collaboration as a new grammar, and I believe that is linked to this open source to publications as well. So a perspective of a policy professional is a global experience that COVID-19 has shown limitations of scholarly researchers focusing on peer values as the only parameter for the research pursuits. Research for social good is a need of the time, and in a constrained world economy, the need for global collaboration, co-investment into research for people-centric needs has become evident. Behavior of researchers in post-19, which is 2020, in the world is likely to change in favor of what I call a science for humanity. And what could be expected in 2020 as beyond scholarly publications truly, that the global community felt challenged by the pandemic of having to harness their collective strength to address a global need. Self-actualized global research community as responsible citizens would come forward and accept the need for science for humanity ahead of the personal desire to pursue talent and ability creativity and seek fulfillment. Open science and open access scholarly publications, I believe, will become even much more appealing for researchers in 2020. And I would like to leave this with a clarion call. In fact, Gandhi said that science without humanity is a social sin. So there's a clarion call for the researchers. Science and research are knowledge activities, and COVID-19 has showcased an urgent need for knowledge and science connecting to solving problems of humanity, the global community. And a science for humanity really is for open and access to scholarly work being wider. Thank you very much. Open science calls for an openness of minds and researchers, and GRC spoke for open access to scientists or global citizens. Human welfare is their call too. COVID may have changed their mindsets, and I believe responsibility researchers calls for science is the priority. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sammy. That was fantastic. it's really interesting to see that huge big picture policy view and how COVID is changing things. And for those of you who missed it, because his slide was quite quick, that last quote he gave from Gandhi is really, really beautiful. And one of the 7 social sins Gandhi said was science without humanity. And I hope that's something we can all get behind. Well, we'll come back to questions at the end. So Stephen is up next. Can I hand over to you?
Thank you very much, Catriona. Let me just share my screen.
I can see your screen.
Okay. Right. Well, thank you very much, Catriona, and hello, everybody. It's a real privilege to be talking to you. Thank you very much for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be with you. So following on from Ramasami's overview of scholarly communication and open access in particular, and how it's been impacted by recent events, and particularly the global pandemic, I'd like to widen the focus a little from talking specifically about scholarly communication to talking about the research ecosystem more generally, and some work that I'm involved with there in the Research on Research Institute, RORI. I'd like to talk you through some of the issues that we've been dealing with in RORI and our approach to them, and the insight that that's given us into the research ecosystem, and then come to focus on some of the implications that has for open access and scholarly communication. Part of what we've been doing in RORI is, over the last 8 to 10 months, talking to a wide range of different actors in the research ecosystem in order to identify what they regard as important issues that merit further investigation. So what those conversations have done is, in an iterative way, developed a set of issues that we think are at the heart of challenges within the research system at the moment that need addressing, some of which relate directly to open access and scholarly communication. And of course, the pandemic has intervened in that process. And so those issues have been discussed in the context of the coronavirus pandemic. And so the impact of that upon our ongoing work, I think, is an interesting question. Now, although it's often understood that global crises such as pandemics can create new trends, I think there's an understanding that what generally happens is that they accelerate existing trends or redirect or slightly redirect existing trends. And so one of the questions that I'm going to be thinking about within this presentation, it'd be interesting for us to discuss, is that question of the extent to which the coronavirus crisis is actually accelerating existing trends, or whether it will create new ones. Many of the existing trends we've seen and talked about in our work have definitely been accelerated or slightly reshaped in the context of coronavirus. And so it'll be interesting to see how that continues. Now, what we're aiming to do in the Research on Research Institute is, I think, unique and very ambitious. Our contention is that there needs to be more research in the area of research on research that brings together insights from different disciplines, that uses a variety of different methods in order to gain depth and breadth of insight. That research needs to involve a wide range of different actors in the ecosystem and needs to focus on having a translational impact so that the research insights can be turned into practice-based solutions. Now, in order to achieve that, we believe that the research needs to be genuinely collaborative and take place in a co-designed and co-produced way so that it can provide that kind of translational impact and therefore has the potential to be transformative in the system. And it's because of those contentions that we set up RORI in the way that we have, aiming to undertake interdisciplinary mixed methods research, to have this translational role in order to not just contribute to knowledge, but also contribute to practice, working in a collaborative way, and also to bring to bear an evidence base that can inform both RORI partners, but also beyond in the ecosystem in general. And to act as a venue for collaboration and discussion that can take place across different actor groups. So not just within the publisher community or within the library community or within the research funding community, but across those communities as well in a global way. Now that, in order to construct that kind of consortium, it requires enormous effort and a great deal of discussion and negotiation, and that is what we are undertaking at the moment. This is the shape of our consortium. The founding partners, Wellcome Trust, Digital Science, and Universities of Sheffield and Leiden. That already is a very interesting combination, a funder, a commercial provider, as well as two universities. And that has set the tone, if you like, for the building of the consortium. To date, we've focused on strategic partners in the area of funding and policy making with research. And you can see that we've assembled an impressive list of partners, 16 partners from 12 different countries and regions, all of whom are now taking an active role in the research and development associated with RORI. Now that partnership, that consortium is in the short term going to remain pretty stable until the end of our pilot phase at the end of September 2021, moving through to the end of the calendar year 21. But we are also beginning conversations now to extend the partnership beyond that pilot phase so that we can demonstrate the feasibility of what we're doing and also make the case for further funding. To give you an idea of the way that the consortium is shaping up, I've talked about the founding partners and they are managing the consortium on a day-to-day basis and the projects which are now being formed and are underway. You can also see here in the founding partners box what we call the Funders Lab. This is a space where funders can experiment, can analyze data, can develop new tools and platforms in order to inform their work. And at the heart of this is the new development of a cloud-based funder data sharing platform. So the funders who were involved in RORI have agreed to share data associated with their work in a way that will enable the analysis of those data in a joint way. Now, this is creating enormous challenges, not just technical challenges, but legal challenges, governance challenges and so on. And that's what we're working through at the moment. But as far as we know, this is a unique development where globally, all of these funders are pooling data so that we can use them as an evidence base in order to develop a better understanding of the research ecosystem. As well as working with the strategic partners I've named, we're also now extending the conversation to, in the first instance, publishers and platform providers. We've been working since the turn of the year on forming various different projects in those areas as well. Now, to date, we've worked under these headings of careers, cultures, and decisions. Careers associated with research at various different stages in different disciplines, and also other careers associated with the research ecosystem. Cultures, dealing with disciplinary cultures, working-based cultures, geographical cultures, and so on, all of which contribute to research. And decision-making and the associated governance mechanisms associated with decisions. How are decisions being made at different points in the research ecosystem? And how could they be made more efficient and also fairer? And as a result of that, we're going to be producing a number of research outputs, not just peer-reviewed journal articles, although there will be some of those, but also reports, tools of various different kinds, methods, visualizations, as well as acting as a forum, as a venue for discussion, bringing various different partners together. Now, one initial aspect of our work was to look at the research on research landscape, and we hope to produce a report later in the autumn on this. Now, as Catriona mentioned in her introduction, there are some aspects of research on research that are very well established. Science technology studies, for example, in the social sciences area, coming out of history and philosophy of science studies. Scientometrics coming out of library and information science area as well. But there are some newer research on research type fields developing, which go under different names. So science of science, meta-research, meta-science, all of these names have been put forward. And in some cases, people have kind of claimed a newness about this. But I think it's important to recognize that research on research has been going for many decades, even if it has a slightly different character in slightly different disciplinary areas. For example, meta-research focusing on reproducibility challenges has tended to focus in the life sciences and particularly psychology, where there are particular issues there that have been highlighted. And that is fairly new, but it draws on insights from other areas that are quite well established. We have detected, though, that a lot of these different research on research fields are still operating in silos. They're often using different methods and different theories, and quite often not talking to each other, as this cluster analysis illustrates. And so one of our aims here is to try to work across the different disciplines involved in research on research in order to gain insight from different methods and different theoretical frameworks. That's what we aim to do. Now, as a result of the conversations we've been having, particularly with research funders, but also more broadly, we've now launched 5 first wave projects for Rory, all of which are now underway. And these focus on different aspects, different challenges within the research ecosystem. They all have some kind of connection with scholarly communication, but their focus is broader than that. They're all affected by COVID. There's a dimension to each of these associated with COVID. First of all, looking in the area of decisions, the Criteria Project is one that's going to be based on this assemblage of data that we're carrying out across different funders. And once that data is available for analysis, that will enable a very large scale analysis of decision-making processes within those organizations, looking in particular issues of equity, diversity and inclusion, looking at issues like gender, for example, across the decision-making process, as well as geographical or disciplinary variations, as well as other issues that need to be addressed in that area. Looking at the issue of randomization, this is a very interesting challenge where a number of different funders are now experimenting with the ability to allocate funding in a random way. Now, this is normally where they've identified the best, say, top 10% of the proposals that they've got, but the allocations of those are then based on very fine-grained judgments where sometimes biases can come into play in a very meaningful way. And so they're experimenting with random allocations of funding at that sort of level. And there are a number of experiments that we're tracking going on in our different funder partners there, and to see what impact they might have. The project looking at excellence is looking at the whole notion, the whole concept of excellence as it affects research. When we see that in initiatives like the UK's Research Excellence Framework, and those notions of excellence are often based on quite a crude set of indicators like impact factors or like H indexes, for example. And some people have criticized them because of that, their very narrow focus, and have claimed that the notion of excellence needs to be pluralized and expanded to include a much wider range of metrics. Other people say we need to ditch the idea of excellence at all because it is skewing the research ecosystem in various undesirable ways. And so we'll be looking at that, carrying out detailed case studies of 10 funders in this whole area of excellence. Fairware is developing a tool in a very practical way that will enable the identification of the fairness of data which is being shared, its findability, accessibility, interoperability, and reusability, and enable researchers to increase the fairness of their data as they share it. And the Pathways project is looking at the pathways of careers in research in various different countries and showing how those are supported or how support could be improved in order to enhance the way in which careers are developed across different disciplines. Now, as I say, all of these have meaningful collaboration and intervention with funders. Many of them are providing funding, they're all providing data of some kind, and people support. So this is a real collaborative effort. All of them now also have a COVID dimension to them, so that we will be able to see some of the impact of COVID on these different questions. And of course, all of them have implications for scholarly communication to a greater or lesser extent. For example, the Excellence Project. Excellence moves into our consideration of the quality of scholarly publications, as we've already discussed today and previously in the conference. But as well as these projects, we're also now in the process of setting up some projects that work directly with publishers and platform providers. And we've worked with a number of different publishers in designing these projects. So once again, these are a kind of barometer of key issues that are seen as worthwhile of investigation in the current climate. So we're focusing on peer review, on diversity, and aligning incentives. The peer review project is looking at the burgeoning number of experiments that are happening in peer review in the scholarly communication space, some of which have been accelerated by COVID or reshaped by the pandemic in various different ways. The rise of preprints is an obvious example to this idea of reshaping approaches to peer review in the context of an emergency. We're going to be carrying out a project that will look to map the different experiments that are going on in peer review and then drill down in various different case studies to look at the detail of how they can be evaluated and look at the motivations behind them. And we're hoping that we'll have a good response from publisher colleagues to explain the experimentation that's going on in their area. Diversity is looking specifically at diversity associated with publishing and publishing decisions. We're hoping once again to assemble data in this area, working with publisher colleagues and how we can assess diversity. It's interesting that some of these data aren't easily available. For instance, data on ethnicity associated with submissions isn't available in many cases, and perhaps we need to reconsider the way in which we're collecting data in order to inform this kind of investigation. But we're working then on carrying out both quantitative and qualitative analyses in this area. And then also what we want to do, bearing in mind the way in which the RORI Consortium is set up, is work across different actor groups to look at the ways in which those actor groups are promoting incentives within the system. So rather than there being a misalignment associated with the work of research funders and publishers in terms of the development of incentives for researchers themselves, looking at ways in which those incentive structures can be more intentionally realigned to create desirable behaviours in the scholarly communication process, such as open behaviours and so on. Now, all of these have an important COVID dimension to them, which we will be analysing, although we're doing some other work associated with COVID as well. There are other key issues involved in the scholarly communication system, of course, one of which is to do with business models and looking at the impact of transformative agreements that we're going to be discussing later in the conference. We're not looking at that in particular because we think other people are doing that. And also we're not being an infrastructure provider. Rory is not doing that work, although we're very happy to work. We want to work with infrastructure providers. But what these different projects are doing is giving us insight in some of the key issues associated with scholarly communication. And we're very much looking forward to working with both the publisher community and other stakeholders in scholarly communication, as well as thinking about the implications for the broader research ecosystem in the work that we carried out. So I'll finish there, but I'm very happy to answer questions as part of the panel session. Thank you very much for listening.
Thanks, Stephen. That was great. And I think one of the powerful things about this is publishers are part of the data set. Yeah. And that's a new way of thinking for publishers. And we ask our researchers to share their data, to be transparent, to be open, to make everything about their methods open and to see whether their conclusions are supported. But when it comes to the whole process of scholarly communication, it's often smoke and mirrors and behind black doors, and there's lack of anonymity and lack of data sharing, and we don't know. And I think that is why that this is so important to beginning to understand what works and what doesn't work in the scholarly landscape. And this means hanging on to the old stuff we've always done that still works, but maybe adopting new ways of thinking too. Please, the audience, put in questions. I know you're listening. Otherwise, I'm going to ask them all, and then which is great for me, but less so for the speakers. Do put in anything you like, as thought-provoking or as provocative as you like. Yang Pan, welcome to OASPA 2020, and please carry on with your talk.
Yes. Okay, thanks for having me in the meeting, and my presentation is combined with two parts. Firstly, I'll introduce the work we have done as a medical publishing house during the pandemic. I will make a brief introduction on the OA policy in our publishing house. And before all of that, let me walk through the history of our publishing house. We are the affiliation publishing house with the Chinese Medical Association, and we publish the official Chinese and English journals of the 88 CMA Specialty Society, and covering all medical fields. So till now, and we have owned 190 medical journals in total. And according to the different needs of the readers, and we classified all 190 journals into 5 collections, which are Chinese serials, China serials, international serials, English and e-journals. And among that, Chinese journals contains our core and high-level journals, and publish the the guidelines and the consensus each year, and being constantly applied by the Special Society of CMA to standardize the clinical behavior. And the China serials fulfill the needs of the primary hospitals, and e-journals are only published online, and all 16 English journals are open access journals. And these 2 journals are the official journals of CMA. The English one published in 1887, and the National Medical Journal of China published in 1915, and both surpass a 100-year history. And when I looked back on the open words of these 2 journals, I'm always touched. One is the founder of the CMJ, Dr. Bong, once wrote these words. It's quite touching. And this one is the Dr. Wu Liande, the founder of the CMA, and also the first editor-in-chief of the National Medical Journal of China. And he wrote the words into Chinese and translated that into English. is the prosperity and the decline of country are always measured by journals. Journals are developed and country is strong. So let's go to the, what we do during the COVID-19 pandemic. I think when the COVID-19 widespread in Wuhan in the late January, we started to apply the fast track flow policy, and the whole process of peer review, editing, typesetting, and publishing online shortened less than 6.22 days. And with the support with the government sectors and the COVID-19 academic research platform successfully established in both Chinese and the English version. So why we build up the platform? Firstly, we want to provide the knowledge to the medical practitioners to share their clinical experience, and in order to enhance the quality of the academic work, the platform is guided by the 4 prestigious academicians in China. In particularly, the related paper published in CMAPH publishing house are open accessed, and viewers are able to read and download the full text documents free of charge. To the author, we also don't charge any fee as well. And this is a timeline of building the platform. On January 30th, the very first paper on discoveries over the novel coronavirus has been published in the Chinese Medical Journal. And on February 1st, the Chinese Medical Association, our publishing house, called for paper collection of COVID-19 related articles nationwide. And on February 15th, a column set up to release research and new fundings towards prevention and treatment of the pneumonia caused by the novel coronavirus. And on March 7th, the column upgraded to the platform. And on April 1st, the English version of the platform is officially launched. And by the end of the August, a total of 1,280 articles from the 144 medical journals available in the platform, and total reads have been reached 3.42 million. And the as the main source, and our platform are also included in the Knowledge Center for China's experience in response to COVID-19, and also were included in the white paper released by the government. So we also share our data with the international organizations and publishing group, such as the WHO COVID-19 database, the World Medical Association reference list, and also the elsewhere Waterclure Wiley, to be better support for them to fighting against the pandemic. And we also have some article cooperation. One consensus published in Chinese Journal of Cardiovascular Diseases. And the American Heart Association want to translate the consensus into English and publish in the circulation in their journal. So in this case, we recognize the importance of open access articles in a time of global challenge, and its value in supporting the fighting against the pandemic. And by looking at the statistics, you will have a clear picture that how crucial the scientific researchers are being needed. According to the data of the PubMed statistical analysis, we can see from January 20th, the articles published in our publishing house received high click volume due to the spread of COVID-19. And by look at the curve right after the WHO announced that the world is now in the grip of a coronavirus pandemic, the clicks reached its peak at nearly 180,000. And we have also analyzed the platform visit volume by each week from the February 9th to April 18th. It has shown that the web IP traffic and the patient cured in China with the same trend. As you can see, in week 1 to week 7, the website reaches first peak value. Each week, up to 1 million visitors. Come to the second phase, the website reached the second peak value due to pandemic. The articles published in the platform are being included in overseas database. The platform attracted lots of overseas medical staff. Therefore, the overseas flow is increasing sharply. Yes. And these three statistic graphs show the 3 different countries, the relation between the platform overseas visits and the new confirmed cases. The red volume is the visits from different countries, and the black line is the number of the confirmed new cases. So the first one is in the United States. In the week April 5th to 11th, the new cases of coronavirus are 230,000, and platform visits from the United States increased to more than 5 million. And the second one is Japan, and we can see because of the Darren princess outbreaks and also the local new cases increasing, the visit are also increased. And the third one is from the Great Britain. We can see in week 5 and week 7, because of the herd immunity falls and because of the Prime Minister tested positive, and the visits also increases. So due to the COVID-19 pandemic, all the medical training and conferences in China are delayed or canceled. But during that special time, the clinician from all need more guidance. So we, as a publishing house, switched the academic training conferences online in February. So till now, we have held 128 conferences and trainings. About more than 1 million medical staffs participated. So this is the screenshot from some of our trainings. The pandemic occurred in the most important festival of the year, the Chinese Spring Festival, and thousands of medical workers voluntarily headed to the PADIC Center of Wuhan and other cities in Hubei province. So to protect every fellow who is struggling with the virus and determined to fight and win this battle. So as an influential publishing house in China, we hold, the literature collection activity. So during this activity, we received more than 300 works, including articles, poems, video clips, and photo works, and nearly 150 works distributed to the public by multi-channels. And we also published a book to memorize this collection of work. And this is some work, some drawings from the ordinary people in China. And that one is the book we published. So it's still, I think it's not a post-pandemic era, it's still in the pandemic era. So as a publishing house, we will remain the framework of the priority publication, and will be more involved in global stage by learning and cooperating with the international organizations and publication group. And we will build user-oriented knowledge services and diversified services to medical staffs. And okay, let's go to the OA publishing. I think according to the figure, China, America, and Britain are the top 3 countries with the most open access articles. And in China, in 2020, I think we have 180 open access journals. We are still in the early stage. And in our publishing house, we own a total of 19 open access journals, and the 6 journals are launching this year and next year. So in the early stage, we still, our publishing house are always in the early stage of the OA publishing. Nearly 90% of our OA journals started publication after 2014. These 3, I think, is the representatives of the OA journals published by our publishing house. The Chinese Medical Journal, Infectious Diseases of Poverty, and also the Chinese Journal of Traumatology. And with more experience on publishing the new English journal, we are making the progress. For example, this red journal, the Maternal Fetal Medicine, is the first English open access journal of maternal fetal medicine in China. And the first issue was published on July 2019. We can see they have very good diversity of the editorial board member, and their submissions manuscript, 50% of their manuscript from the abroad. Though it just published for a year, some of the articles have been cited for 7 times, including the Lancet Infectious Disease and AJOG, etc. So this one, I think this is the first Chinese journal in our publishing house will be open access to the readers. I think next year we will switch that into OA to broaden the audience group. And as you see, and our publishing house is trying hard to develop our journals and competitiveness in every aspect. And in our future, we will continue to learn and implement the advanced operation management of open access publication, and to achieve the expected goal of raising the first-class journals. So thanks for your listening. Thank you.
Thank you, Yang. That was it was lovely to see those insights and to hear from you know, an area so impacted early on by the pandemic, how you responded and coped as a journal. I think publishing art and poems and photos also speaks to the sort of humanity side of science, of publishing. And it's lovely to see that. There's loads of things in there we could talk about, but we're going to move on so we can get some time for questions there, and they're rolling in too. Hélène, please, and apologies if I pronounced your name wrong.
Yeah, no, that's fine. So just trying to share my screen and presenting now. So I will be talking about the submission changes that happened during the pandemic. So the first now 9 months of the year. So I work at digital science and as a consultant and a researcher. So some of the work that I do is also, we have submitted with some colleagues some of this into journals, and I have a special interest in looking into the gender representation of researchers. So this is what I will be presenting today. So I'll be showing things about publication speed. So I think this is reflecting a lot on what was presented just now, but looking at the data side on the global perspective, and also the gender imbalance, which I think many of you have probably heard of, the fact that the pandemic has impacted differently both genders. So with school closure, women have been impacted more, as they have often stayed at home and taken care of kids not going to school. while often trying to still do their full-time job. So for the publication speeds, we normally in bibliometrics use the publication date, which used to be the publication of the issue of the physical print. And this has stayed actually in the publication stage, but actually there are dates that are also available and that are also quite interesting to look at. So we have the receive and submit or submitted date, which is when the author sends its paper, and then when it's accepted, when it's first online, because sometimes the paper will appear online before it is actually fully accepted. And then because there are just minor changes, and then it is sometimes in an issue a year later. So there are quite interesting dates, which in bibliometrics we rarely look at. We normally look at dates, so articles that have been published at least 2 years ago, so that there is enough time for citations to accumulate and that kind of thing. So when the pandemic started, a few colleagues and I thought that it would be really interesting to actually look at how we could use these other dates in order to see what was the publication change that were happening. So this is a little bit difficult to look at because this is things that are changing. So I have been running this analysis for the past 4 months, I think, and it changes still a lot different. I mean, the trend is the same, but the numbers are always a little bit changing. So I've used Data in Dimensions, which is a scholarly database and which contains publications. So in our pipeline, we have different dates that are shared by publishers. Not all articles will have these dates because only about 20 to 25% of the publications have actually this received, accepted, and online dates. So this is what I will base my analysis on. Then I have used the image of the database. I was on the 1st of September of 3 years, so 2018, 19, and 20. And the reason for that is that we're looking at articles that have been accepted in different week of the year. So I will be looking at week 1 of 2018, 19, and 20, what has been accepted on that week. If I was looking now at what had been accepted in 2018, that would be quite different from what it looked like on the 1st of September of 2018, because sometimes there is a bit of time lag. So we didn't want to have a bit of unbalance in that way. So we used dimensions, images to look at these different years. And then because we wanted to look, we wanted to see really a big effect. So we looked at publications that were in fields of research where we would expect to see a lot of changes due to COVID. So we looked at infectious diseases, emerging infectious disease, clinical research, vaccine-related, biodefense, pneumonia and influenza, and also pneumonia. So all this would have research comparative to what research was done on COVID, and so that would be in the same venue, etc. So that would be quite easy to compare. So this is, for instance, the average days for from submit to accepted. So the week number that is shows at on the x-axis shows the accepted date. So on the first week of the year of 2018, 19, and 20, all the papers that have been accepted had been in the pipeline for 135 days or so in average. So about 4.5 months, I think. And then you can see in blue and in green at the top, the two lines are relatively similar. It just always takes an average around 129 or 30 days. But in yellow, the line at the bottom, we can see like there is a really a sharp increase, and then a bit of a plateau, which is, I guess, what the publishers can do better. I mean, you need to review, and this is normal that it takes time. This is just an average, obviously, but this is all papers that are related to COVID, likely. In this date. So mid-March I have indicated, because this is the time maybe where we can consider that most of the world was in lockdown. And this is based all, you can see at the bottom right, between 10 to 40,000 publications per month. So about 2,000 per week at least. So this is what happened between the submission to the acceptance, and then between the acceptance to online. We can see that there was already an improvement that was happening in 2019, but we have also again a bit of an improvement in 2020. So from about 4 weeks, it takes about 2 weeks. It took in 2020. The reason why there are some negative values is that, like I said earlier, sometimes the online version happens before the manuscript is fully accepted, actually, which explains why, in average, there will be some negative values. But this is just a trend. This will change probably as we go along then in the analysis. So then I was interested, I thought, but what happens with the open access publications? So I reran the analysis, and we can see that 2018 and 19, it's just slightly faster than overall publications. So that's quite interesting to see that there's already a little bit of an acceleration here. And also in 2020, we can see that the ability of open access publication is much more agile, and it can change much faster, actually. The drop is much earlier, and yeah, this is actually quite interesting. And then we have a similar trend also in from the acceptance to online dates, and we have, so in 2020 we reach in average a week to be between acceptance and online. So that's quite good for COVID papers, because they are actually present very quickly and available to the public. So we can see a clear acceleration of publishing with reduction of time between submission and decisions. And decision to online. So from 18.5 to 15.5, we gain 3 weeks, and then we gain a week and a half. And this effect is even faster for the open access publications, between 18 to 13.5 and 3 to 1 week in average. So this is all averages, obviously. And that was on papers that would be related to COVID. So for the gender imbalance, this time we decided to look at all subjects, because we didn't think that the effect would appear only there. It would be probably quite widespread, probably affecting differently the applied or non-applied subjects, but we just looked at the overall. The expectation was that women would publish less after school closure around the world. So we looked this time at per month, because there wasn't enough data per week. So we used the first name of the author to infer gender. So at Digital Science, we have a database of first names that are with a score. So are you more likely to be a male or a female? We only kept the ones that are non-ambiguous. So for instance, if you're called Simone in France, you will be a woman, but if you're called Simone in Italy, you will be a man. So these names, will just exclude them, and we'll exclude unknown name. We are not guessing, we're just using probabilities. This is very difficult or even impossible to do on Asian names. So The reasons are that there's a lack of data. So the data sets that we use have been created by Western companies and are more related to Western names. There's also a loss of data between Chinese characters and Roman alphabet. So sometimes a name will be written differently in Chinese characters, but then once it's translated to a Roman, it will be exactly the same. So one will be a male and the other will be female, but it will be written the same in Roman alphabet. We also have a poor standardization of the romanization, leading to an infinity of spelling and some, I know that this happens in Thai, for instance, where there isn't really a fixed spelling, which makes an infinity of name and therefore almost near impossibility to actually find the gender based on the first name. We also consider the first name as being the first part of the name, which means that when the author has inverted their first name and last name, like this happens sometimes, this is just this is data that you lose, and this happens more often in Asian settings. So this is the data for all authors in all venues. So per month, I'm looking here between 2016 and 17 in blue, the difference. So in January, in 2017, there was about...
Hélène, are you on the right slide? I'm just wondering whether we're seeing still the graph that says average days from submitted to accepted.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Is there a timeline?
Yeah, sorry about that. If you wanted to maybe just reshare that window again through the share screen button, that would be great.
Oh, I think my computer has, yes, kind of crashed. Apologies. It's weird that it's still, like the sound is okay. And yeah, I don't know. I'll just stop from.
Shall we, while you're just doing that, I was just thinking about one question. We are getting questions in. We're not going to have a huge amount of time for questions, but to go back to what Stephen was saying, to what extent, does COVID actually accelerate the existing trends that are already, and I think this is what your talk is about. You carry on and get the screenshot.
Thank you.
That's okay. But this is really one for all the speakers. To what extent does COVID accelerate the existing trends, or is actually creating new ones? And I think that'd be really interesting. And just while we're waiting, actually, I was thinking of asking Sammy while you're getting your screen back, Hélène.
Yeah, thank you.
Because Sammy, you've seen policy changes from a global perspective about open access, and what's your sense that we're seeing something really new with COVID, or it's just speeding up what is happening already?
From my perspective,
oh, Sammy, apologies. Could you put your video on if possible? But no worries otherwise.
Is it okay?
Yeah.
From my perspective, from the policy space, I think at the moment what we are seeing is acceleration of trend rather than creating new trends from the open space publication source. But policies take a long time in terms of the time delay between what you bring and what you perform. But there is a group of 27 institutions, research councils in Europe have come very strongly together in this open source model. Therefore, I personally think that there is a behavioral change coming from the policy perspective as well. Whether they've seen the effect already or not, that I don't think I can make a comment. But I think the changes are taking place. But what will happen as an impact, whatever we're seeing today is probably a natural trend rather than a policy instinct, because there's a time gap, in my opinion.
Yeah. So, and do you think that's just inevitable because policy takes longer to catch up than what's happening on the ground? And
that's a time delay, and time. If you whatever decision policy directions we brought about 5-6 years ago as funding agencies together. See, 57 agencies coming together worldwide to speak in favor of open source was a big thing at that time, 5-6 years ago.
Yeah.
And you see the impact of it with some time delays. So there's a cultural diversity as well. You must take that into account. But I believe Europe has taken the lead in this area at this moment in terms of policy getting together. And we probably will see this impact sooner than what we would have otherwise had if the COVID had not happened. It's my view.
So just to bring in the others very briefly, do you sense the same thing, Stephen and Yang?
So yes, I think one of the things that we're looking at in a Rory context is that most of the issues that we had already identified as being key issues in the research ecosystem now have an important COVID dimension to them, which isn't fundamentally reshaping that issue, but is impacting it in various different ways. So we're seeing, for example, trends in the scholarly communication area, like, for instance, wider adoption of preprints that have been accelerated as a result of the pandemic. The need for greater infrastructure and interoperability, for example, that once again is accelerated by the pandemic, and concerns about questions of diversity that have once again been highlighted by the pandemic because of the, for example, the very unequal impact of lockdown on different groups, different genders, for example. So, you know, all of those things are not new, but they're given a different dimension by the pandemic and maybe slightly reshaped, but they're things that we know are in the system and that are key issues that need addressing, or key trends that are already there. That's our impression at the moment, at least.
I mean, it will be interesting when Hélène, have you got your screen back?
Yeah.
But one of the things that I want to know is will we go back to business as usual, or will these trends stay? But hold that thought, Hélène, if you could, and I'm sorry to pressurize you on time, but if you can go through quickly the last bit. So you're just talking about your analysis of the gender.
The gender, yes, exactly.
Yeah,
so
that's right.
Yes, you should be seeing this now. So what we had heard was that women were submitting less papers. So we looked at the data and we looked at the difference, because there are more and more women publishing every year, because there are more and more women in the academic world. So we had expected anyway a bit of an increase each year. So as you can see, in January we had already, so we have an increase between 1.5 and 2.5% in 2018, 19 and 20. And so 16, 17, 18. In 2020, compared to the year before, we already see a decrease in January. Then in February, there is almost no more. There is the same amount than the year before in proportion. And then we see the same thing in March. So yeah, this was quite interesting, because the perception on the ground was that there was a clear decrease, and this was not, I mean, the data doesn't show clearly that there is a decrease. August is because we don't have enough yet enough data, so that's the reason probably why it's quite negative. But otherwise, there seem to be still quite a lot of women publishing. So then I thought, because the publishers are actually seeing most of the time the first author, and so we looked at what's the gender balance in this first author, and there we can see clearly that there is really a decrease in the proportion of women. So papers, so women are still appearing on papers, but they are not leading the papers anymore. And this is really interesting, because this will have quite a big impact on women's career if this is not taken into account. And we can see this happens like clearly from April, May, June. So this is quite important. So then I wanted also to look at the open access. The open access, we can already see quite a big impact actually already in the first part of the year, which is unnecessarily related to the school closure. So this might be just a normal fluctuation. And then there isn't a lot after between May and August. But here we look again at the first author, and we can see that there is a clear decrease. So I think we can say that there is no clear decrease of proportion of women publishing, but there is, as the first author, a clear decrease both in all venues and in open access in an even more unprecedented way. So in summary, using submission data, so this is just data that had been shared by publishers. The publishing, this shows that the publishing pipeline has sped up even more in open access journals during the pandemic, and that women have stayed afloat in publishing, but just about, and they're much less likely to have a leadership role, which is, I think, a really big problem. Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, that's remarkable, the social impact of COVID on researchers and women in research. And it's the same actually when you look at any disadvantaged group, the inequities whether you're a woman or from different countries are increasing under the stress of a pandemic, which is fascinating. Okay, we've got 10 minutes for questions. Some of them have already been answered. And so hello?
Sorry to interrupt. Bernie was just saying if you want to go until 1:40 with questions, that would be great.
Okay, let's see how we're going to do. Bernie, you chip in too, come in and help me with the questions if needed. So there was one that, speaking to Helene's talk just now, from Ian Caswell, are you planning on running further publication speed analyses for other disciplines? For example, in the humanities and social sciences? Because while COVID-19 has speeded up more medical publications, the anecdotal experiences perhaps suggest that it's actually caused delays in the humanities. So that's really interesting. And if you could...
Yeah, that was something... That was something that I was thinking of, is that there was really a big push towards publishing very quickly COVID papers. And I mean, a publication within 3 months, if we consider that reviewers have to read the paper, submit comments, and then it's revised and then reviewed again, I think that is actually really, really fast. And so I think it's much more difficult to do maybe in other disciplines, and maybe much less needed. So we haven't looked yet at this difference because we don't have enough data, but this is something that we will definitely look into once we have had enough data, because at the moment this is really, this is so fresh. I mean, this is something definitely for next year. Yeah, thanks. Thank you.
And Stephen, this one for you, in terms of aligning the incentives work, and it's intersecting with to what extent is it intersecting with other initiatives like this, and in particular that from the National Academies of the Sciences, Engineering and Medicine, NASEM. So NASEM's work seems to be focusing on the Centres for Open Science from universities and/or scholarly societies, and hiring the evaluation of tenure promotion portfolios. What's your view on how aligning incentives across publishers and funders can intersect with those of aligning incentives for institutions, which I think is really interesting. So how do we get the policy working all the same direction for all?
Yeah, I mean, that's the real challenge, and it is a challenge, isn't it? One of the things that, well, let me say two things. One is that we're determined not to reinvent the wheel, not even to try to invent the wheel in Rory. So we want to work and collaborate with people who are already in the space, but add the dimensions that we can to the discussion. And one of the things that we're setting ourselves up to do in Rory is to be able to bring together various different actor groups. So work across, say, for example, funders and publishers in a worthwhile way. Now that we recognize is really challenging. And we do recognize that also that historically there have been somewhat confrontational relationships between some actor groups, and that can create real problems. So we want to try and focus on areas where we can achieve something. Now, one area that's been highlighted around alignment of incentives is around, for example, in data sharing, where it's possible that publishers and funders could work together to align incentives in a way that they recognize to be mutually beneficial, very obviously. So that's an area that we're investigating at the moment. But we recognize that particular project, working with publishers, is going to take longer to set up because of the issues around the negotiations, the relationship management that needs to happen before you can even start the investigation. And that's the case in a lot of the work we're doing at the moment. That kind of relationship management thing and getting buy-in to this is actually a real challenge. But that's why it's, I think that's why it's exciting, but that's why it takes time to build capacity.
And that's I mean, I suppose that's what's so interesting about Rory, because you're just at the start of all that. So yes, you'll have to come back next year and tell us.
The signs are good, I have to say, so we're quite optimistic. Yeah.
Bernie, do you want to take that question from Janine at all? I don't know, or I can't.
Yes, I think it's a really interesting point, is that even though there's huge amounts of work going on to recognise that publishing isn't article shaped and is not all about article publication in journals and citations, we still, I think, ignore the publishing that goes on earlier, maybe in the chain. So I just wondered if there was anything any of the speakers might want to talk about in terms of to Janine's question, in terms of the stuff that's happening that's not, maybe that doesn't have a spotlight on it.
And also I think on that, the sort of work of postgraduates, and I'm presuming here, Janine, you're meaning sort of early career researchers perhaps, who are doing a lot of this work that is an article based around COVID and other things in labs and things, and how do, and especially cross-discipline or interdisciplinary work. And where does, how, I suppose in relation to this panel, how do we get data on that for a start? How do we study what's happening to early career researchers, postgraduates, and the impact of potentially COVID on them? I think, Bernie, is that your sense as well?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So this is for all panelists. It would be Yang. Do you have an opinion about how, for the early career researchers? Oh, you're muted. You're muted. Oh.
Yeah. Yes.
Got you.
I think in China and about the postgraduate research, it mainly depends on the tutors' demands. Yeah, and also I think
that's interesting, because that was something that Professor Yang earlier was talking about, that the role of how much the sort of senior lab member, influences what the more junior members can publish and where.
I think that publishing academic paper in medicine, I think you must raise a clinical question and then to solve a problem and then do your study. That is the study they should do, and in medical field. So in the medical postgraduate students in China, and also always the tutor can put their question and to make them to study in one specific field. and then write a paper and to publish that in some Chinese journals, I think.
I'll probably comment something about this question in the Indian context. The major funding agency of this country has a special window or a vertical for early career researchers. There's a separate funding allocated, and that's how they compete among themselves. And I understand from my successor in the government that there have been a larger number of proposals being received from them relative to this subject. What percentage success they will have is unknown to me yet, but the number of proposals from the early career researchers went up by 40% in the last 6 months.
That's fascinating. And you think that was a response to COVID?
Yes, it is a response to COVID. It's a response to the COVID situation. That's why I specifically talk about this.
Yeah.
Because they earmarked a fund.
And so they're applying for grants, yes. Are they being funded more? So why do you think it's coming from the early career researchers? That's
No. I'm not making a comparison between early career researchers and the normal ones. There's a separate vertical we have created for early career researchers alone. Okay. That we did some time ago. Rather than they compete with the general pool, the separate competitive grant for early career researchers alone. And we have something else for women as well. Yeah. Now, that number of proposals we received in the pre-COVID time, within themselves, there's an increase. Yeah. That's a number. I mean, what percentage of the proposals met with the competitive grant requirement quality, I don't know. But the actual number is increased.
Which is really interesting to explore, and again, getting hold of the data and understanding why that was happening. And so having dedicated funding streams for early career researchers and for women makes a difference. Stephen, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, we've got a specific project in this whole area of career pathways, but one of the challenges is assembling data across different countries that can be compared, and to try and work out, the progress of people from doing PhDs through to, postgraduate fellowships and developing in their career, and where leakage occurs in that kind of system. And one of the things that early work done by, say, Wellcome has demonstrated is that work really needs to be done on cultures in research situations, which may be disadvantaging certain groups, and where certain people are not being, people's requirements not being taken into account. So I think there's some real challenges here about assembling the data, but also trying to understand the dynamics of what's going on. Important to do so, of course.
Yeah. And Helen, do you know if digital science or others are also doing work and research in that area on sort of at the postgraduate early career researcher stage? Or your video isn't on, sorry, Helen.
Yeah, well, actually it's because
that's okay.
My toddler.
That's fine. Hi.
From the nap.
That's okay. That's all right. Bring him or her in. I can't see. I can see the top of his head or her head.
So yeah, I mean, I think the problem with that is that we work mainly with data about outputs, and I think graduate researchers, and what we are interested in here is to measure the lack of outputs, I think. And therefore, for digital science, this is something that is quite difficult. And this is, I think this kind of question would be actually really interesting to see with a survey, something that is a little bit more qualitative and gives more chance to people that actually have disappeared kind of from the radar, that will have to have stopped their PhDs, or, I mean, this time where people couldn't reach labs and that kind of things, I can imagine that there was a huge impact, especially if you were a PhD student that was, I mean, this is your entire PhD, basically. So this is quite, this will have a huge impact definitely on graduate researchers, I think. Yeah.
Which is interesting. And so we can move on there. There's another one about early career researchers. And this is, again, in terms of language, how much work is being done on the assessment of, and I know OASPA had a workshop about this, on the extent to which language has impacted researcher behaviour or within COVID. I mean, I think that's interesting that you're publishing more English open access journals at the moment. Do you think, what impact do you think it has on the way the pandemic, or we see the pandemic, the fact that we're only able, that most of the publications and most happen in English? Is there?
I think in our, the database of the COVID-19, most of the articles are in Chinese. And in PubMed, we have the English abstracts for them to share. And if they want to know more about this article and, the techniques are developed, so they can easily translate them into English to know what this article talking about.
Yeah.
Yes.
Bernie, do you have another one? If not, I'm going to start. Yeah, you need to switch off your mute.
Sorry, I'm doing lots of things at once. Yeah, well, it's not really, it's more going back to the concept of excellence, I think, that Stephen talked about. I just wondered if we could do a really quick, or maybe just a couple of the speakers, if they could say something about which elements would they include as a measure of excellence that maybe haven't been used in the past or not commonly, because it's a problematic term, I think, and some people. So are there any ideas of what we should be, using as a measure of excellence in the future? Anyone? Including Catriona.
Well, how do you measure what is quality, what is excellence? That's just such a huge question. But yeah, I would be interested, Stephen, given Rory's approach, that how are you defining excellence or quality, or is that what your research is?
The latter. So
yes,
that's what our research is. What we want to do is look at how excellence is both understood and operationalized in various different organizations, focusing on the 10 case study sites that we've got within the consortium, all of whom have excellence written into strategic documents, policy procedures. Their panel members are all advised about excellence. Some have measures of excellence in various different forms. Some use the word excellence in various different measures of quality associated with looking at proposals. So we want to look at how excellence impacts on all of those processes, as well as to get people to reflect on the importance of excellence as they conceive it, and see what that means in terms of whether it can be pluralized, as I've put it, expanded the number of measures that we use to define excellence, widened, or actually whether it needs to be ditched, and whether it needs to be completely just say this doesn't make sense. It's a rhetorical, people have criticized it as a rhetorical concept, which actually skews behaviors in a negative way. Now, the problem is, if you ditch it, what do you replace it with? And so there are some really interesting questions that we're hoping to get an insight into over the next year in this project. So I'll be really interested if people have an input that they can make.
And I think there have been 1 or 2 projects on that, but actually collecting on data on what quality really is, what excellence is, and what people mean by it when they say the word. And I think they're probably talking at completely cross purposes sometimes as well. Okay, last minute, I was just, and this responds, very last question to Yang. I was fascinated, and this is also one in the chat about your analysis of publication speeds, and in particular why open access journals seem to be able to respond more quickly. This goes back to his question about humanities and social sciences. But I was just wondering, do you have, just in the last minute, any sense of why open access journals might be quicker? Now, this is for Hélène, sorry, I beg your pardon, not Yang.
Yeah, I think my one of my idea was that OA journals are much newer, so maybe the structure is a bit are less old maybe, and so easier to, maybe more flexible, already mostly online and with platforms that are well established, maybe where there is a bit less in older journals. Maybe that was one of my ideas.
Yeah, it could be. I mean, there's all sorts of, but here's another reason for going open access if you haven't. Our panelists, thank you all very much from the very different parts of the world and time zones for taking part in this. I hope you can continue and stay with us for a bit longer today. Thank you again from everyone here and at OASPA.
Thank you.
And come back after the session.